Good morning. Today we're going to start our investigation into Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion in 1944. We're going to build on what we've already looked at with the building of the Atlantic Wall by the Germans and the Dieppe raid, which we've learned in the last lesson. Today, we're going to get our introduction, and over the next few lessons, we're going to deal with certain aspects of this particular invasion military operation. Our objective today, you're going to learn about the invasion of Western Europe. Codename was Operation Overlord. You're going to be successful today if you can describe the lessons learned from the Dieppe raid, describe the challenges for the Allied planners, and then read an article and complete the questions for turn-in based on the primary source that's also attached on this assignment, which comes from the Tehran Conference. Why did the Allies need to open a second front? Really three things here. They had to take pressure off the Russians by making the Germans send their troops and equipment to fight in the West. They wanted to pressure Germany's industrial capacity in manufacturing weapons and munitions and strain German manpower. And then they wanted to provide for the possibility of invading Germany to end the war from the West. Now, what is important to understand here is that the Germans were fighting a bitter and bloody war in the East. And after they defeated the French in 1940 and started building shortly thereafter the Atlantic Wall, they sent munitions and they spent a lot of money to go ahead and build up a defense there. But in terms of the troops there, what they would do is send units to France and then build them up with recruits, send them to the East. And then when they got bloodied and beat up pretty badly, they would rotate them out and rebuild them and train them a little bit and then send them back. France was that training ground. So they would go ahead and rotate their units. Because of that, the Germans were not spending ammunition in the West while they were in the East. So all the weapons they could dedicate to the Eastern Front. By opening the Western Front, they'd have to fight in two directions, and that would lower the number of weapons, munitions, and the manpower available to fight in the East as well. So that was the purpose of opening the Second Front. Finally, with Hitler's fighting in the East, the Allies had to go ahead and get a foothold in a place where they could invade Germany. Both Roosevelt and Churchill were committed to a non-communist Western Europe. They didn't trust the Russians. The Russians really didn't trust them. And so they could not allow the Russians to go ahead and invade all of Germany and liberate the rest of the continent and turn it into a communist bloc. The Cold War was essentially brewing at this point. First order of business was to defeat the Germans, and that's what the Operation Overlord was there to establish the foothold in Europe. How do they apply the lessons learned at Dieppe? Well, more and different types of tanks would be necessary to attack the German defenses, and we're going to deal with that in another class. Okay, critical ports to get supplies and equipment in and the casualties out were going to be very difficult to secure in an assault. The Germans also learned from Dieppe, and they put much tougher defenses around their ports because of that need to go ahead and get supplies in and out for the Allies. It would make it much easier for them to defeat an invasion before it could get established if they could keep the Allies out of ports. Better intelligence on the conditions of the landing sites and the Atlantic Wall defenses was going to be also very important. The British tanks that were launched at the Dieppe raid were stuck on the beach. They couldn't traverse the rocky beach. The stones got stuck in the treads and made them immobile. They didn't have sufficient firepower, and as a result, the Dieppe raid was a bad experience for everybody that was there, and it was a huge defeat. So they learned, and they were, as I said, we're going to deal with that in a different way of getting through this. They planned for all these aspects that they'd learned from the Dieppe raid. Finally, what were the three challenges the Allies had to overcome in their battle plan? We already addressed the ports. They were going to be too heavily defended. How do you solve the problem of resupply? We've got to get trucks full of supplies in. And if we don't have a port, how do we best do that? How do we get past the beach defenses? All the obstacles and mines and everything that the Germans had put all along their Atlantic wall was going to make the invasion extremely costly. So they had to plan for that in their invasion plan. And then finally, in order to go ahead and get a foothold on the continent of Europe, how do you prevent the Germans from sending their tank forces to the invasion site and defeating them on the beaches? This was a big controversy within the German ranks as well, how best to go ahead and accommodate that. This is going to result in a couple things for the Allies. How do you keep the Germans from committing that reserve to the actual invasion site, and how to go about making sure that you have air superiority? That's something that we'll deal with in a separate class as well. Okay, at this point, what I would like you to do is open the document, which is a small excerpt from the Tehran Conference, which was December 1st of 1943, and the agreement between the big three on opening a second front. There are some questions on the second page. Please fill those things out, answer the questions. The last question is going to be some inquiry questions. So I want you to think deeply about that. And what questions would you have to come up with, or would you be curious about if you were going to do some inquiry into some aspect of what the Allies put together at Tehran? We got to practice the questioning a little bit here. So get that done, turn it in, and in our next class, we're going to deal with another aspect of the D-Day invasion.